Hi everyone. Thank you for being here to meet with the fabulous director of CODA, Sian Heder, and I am going to bring her on right now. This is exciting because Sian and I grew up in the same area. There she is. Look, it's the magic. It happened. It's working so far.
Oh my goodness. Hi.
Hi. So glad you're joining us. This is awesome because we've been trying to, first of all, we've been trying to do this. I don't want everyone to think we just jumped on the bandwagon of your fabulousness.
We've been trying for a while, for
Thank
sure.
you. But we are thrilled for you and proud of you. Maybe some of you who are joining us don't know, but at Pearl Street, Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, who are the owners of Pearl Street, and I all grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And Sian also grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So maybe there's something in the water?
I was behind Matt and Ben, so I was in school with Casey. So Casey was a junior when I was a freshman.
Awesome.
So,
And we all did theater with the same kind of theater teachers, and I think that planted a lot of seeds for us around what we ended up doing.
and Jerry Specca was part of Jerry Specca and Donald Burrows were kind of a mashup, like in this teacher character. Like those kind of two of the teachers that I was drawing on who were mentors in my life. So it's pretty cool to have that.
I wondered that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I wondered both, wow, how many people were lucky enough to have a teacher like this teacher in CODA, but also I feel like I recognize this teacher, so that's amazing to know that they're kind of this mix-up of teachers that we have. I have the feeling we have some Cambridge people on the chat who are waving to us, so thank you for being here too. And if anybody's got questions for Sian, put them in. I'm going to go ahead and ask some questions, but this is completely also just casual, and we're so excited to have you. So like we're going to take advantage of these quick 15 minutes.
Live, so we should just make sure some crazy shit happens that's like totally
bring the crazy shit. Bring all the crazy shit. So I've got some questions. We'll do some questions, and again, keep it casual. But since I brought up Cambridge, I'm curious, and I will shout out Brittany for making these fabulous questions for us, but we want to know, do you think there's anything about the kind of area we grew up in or about Cambridge that led to your creativity or your work or the work that the others of us do?
Well, I love that question, thinking about that question, because my first instinct is like both my parents are artists. They're both visual public artists. If you're from Cambridge, you know the gloves going down the Porter Square subway station. Like, that's my mom. So, like, I grew up, watching her make art, hanging out in her studio while she made art, collecting gloves on the street for her to bronze to put in the subway station, So in terms of being an artist, it feels like, that came from my family for sure, and my household. But I was thinking about Cambridge as a place, and I think the thing that I land on with Cambridge is that I don't know how it is now, but I feel like when we were growing up, it was so diverse, and it was this true melting pot of people where my classmates were from everywhere, economically, racially, different countries, different immigrant families, and I feel like there's something, and it was a community that really worked. It was a school system that really worked. I felt like, I don't know, I felt like my public school education in Cambridge was amazing if I think back on it. And I think back on those teachers and like Donald Burrows and like Jerry Specca and like, Larry Aronson, who had Howard Zinn be our main history textbook. And this was like in the 90s. So you're like, everyone was so far out in front of a lot of these conversations. And I think about, in high school that I was a part of this group, Anisimus, that was working on like
you were
planning curriculum and like, how do we get this in the classroom? And so in a way, I feel like the biggest takeaway as an artist that I got growing up in Cambridge was like, it's not all about me, right? That like everyone has a story. Those stories are amazing. You know, they're not always where you think they are. And I feel like I grew up with a real awareness that my story was not the only story and was not the important story even. And so when I think about what's drawn me as a storyteller, it has been people that are not generally represented, or stories that are not generally represented in kind of mainstream what we've seen for so long. And I think that did come from Cambridge. You know, it did come from constantly being in dialogue and in relationship and community with people that were not like me.
Yeah.
Such a melting pot of experiences and upbringings. And I don't know if Cambridge is still like that, or if it's gotten kind of, you know, I feel like, you know, with the reduction of rent control and all these things, it's like you sort of change the status of the city as a city. But I don't know, there was a way of questioning also in, I think, my education, like questioning kind of the standard story that we're fed.
I love it. Well, let's use that to pivot into CODA and how that story came to you, why you decided that because this was your big transition from writing into directing, right? I mean, although you had done...
Tallulah was my first film, and so that was, you know, Tallulah was with Elliot Page and Allison Janney and was at Sundance in 2016, and I got, you know, came back from Sundance, and this was a remake of a French film called La Famille Bélier. And I went in to meet with Lionsgate. At the time, it was a studio movie, and they were looking for a writer-director who would take this idea. And to be honest, I watched the French film, and I felt like the story, the premise had so much potential, and then yet there was so much unfulfilled exploration in the story of deaf culture, of, you know, casting authentically deaf actors, of seeing ASL on screen in a big way and allowing that to live as a real language in its true form on screen. So there was so much opportunity in a remake, because normally I think I would have been like, well, don't do a remake, like the movie's been made, what's the point of doing it again? And then the opportunity to set it in Gloucester, Massachusetts, do really well. And like, I grew up going there in the summers and visiting friends that lived there, and that fishing community on the North Shore, which just felt so specific. And I hadn't really seen it on screen before. And I'd watched that town really struggle with its identity, which started as a fishing community, and kind of that industry is dying, and so it's trying to reinvent itself. And it just seemed like a cool place to set a story, and to go home and make a movie is the coolest thing. You know, my parents are in the movie. I had like childhood friends who showed up and were extras. Like, it was just this family affair, it felt like.
I love that opportunity to kind of increase the narratives that come out of the area, because I think people focus on certainly kind of the accent is a big piece of it, and on things that honestly we've done at Pearl Street that still, you know, have been wonderful, but also limiting. And I loved that opportunity to kind of show this other community that's part of Massachusetts and part of kind of growing up and being raised there. What kind of special challenges were there, and that can include also kind of joyful moments were there in working with deaf actors in doing a story that centers deaf people?
Well, I think because it hadn't been done a lot, there wasn't like a handbook for it, in the sense that your line producer, if you're doing a stunt, you know, you're trying to flip a car on screen, and, you know, well, these are all the ways that we flipped a car in the past, and you need this stunt person, maybe you could use a ramp, you can use this, you can do, you know, and people have the stunt coordinator that you call, you have the thing, and this was a little bit uncharted territory. And I felt lucky. My friend Andrew Ahn was directing This Close, which is on the Sundance Channel, which is Shoshana Stern's show. And they had, you know, a lot of deaf actors, deaf creator, showrunner, you know, so I got to go visit that set and kind of take notes and be like, how many interpreters are they using, and where are the interpreters? And, you know, oh, they have, you know, someone by the monitor, an interpreter by the monitor, who is just speaking all the lines into a track so that my editor could turn on that audio track when he was cutting and have something to follow. So like little things like that we probably wouldn't have thought of, you know, honestly. We would have had, you know, him getting dailies and being like, I'm not fluent in ASL, follow this, you know. So there were a lot of things that I felt like were really helpful from that show, but then also it was just a total learning process for all of us to be on set and go like, you know, I think we overestimated. We had something like 7 interpreters when we started. We didn't need that many. I think by the end we had 3. And I had been studying sign for, when I started writing the script, I started studying sign language. I knew I wanted a lot of the script to be in ASL, so I felt like it was important to have an understanding of the language. And then when I knew that I knew pretty early on that I wanted to work with deaf actors, and I felt like I wanted, you know, I didn't want to be completely reliant on an interpreter on set. But I didn't realize how challenging it would be for me to have an interpreter in the middle of that relationship. Because I'm really an actor's director. I love that process of working on performance and the closeness and the trust that comes in that relationship. And when you have someone else there in the middle of it, and you're sort of, you don't know, like I give this note, even when I'm giving a hearing actor a note, I don't always know that we're on the same page, or a word that I say is going to mean the same thing to them. And then when you have an interpreter in the middle of that, you're like, oh my God, I don't know how this is being communicated. So on the first day we were kind of working, and you know, I think I was giving a note to Daniel, and I was watching Daniel like look at the interpreter, not at me. And there's so much happening on my face and in my eyes. And I just said, can I just sign with you directly? And we will just have the interpreter right there, and they can jump in, but can we stumble through this together? And I'm, you know, at that point I was sort of conversational. I would not say, you know, I'm still not fluent at all. But it was like, I have to be able to just have this connection with you guys. And they were craving it too. And they were like, yes, please, let's do that. And so we kind of just jumped in, and I learned a lot really fast, because when you're desperate to kind of have this connection, you know, you're just like a sponge. And then there were always interpreters. We had amazing interpreters who were all CODAs themselves. So there were some amazing interpreters who were on set and really became such an integral part of the process too. But yeah, challenging, you know, how do you call action? How do you call cut? Like, you know, how do you make sure that there's always an interpreter in the actor's sight line? We were out on boats. We were shooting out at sea on fishing boats. So there's safety concerns too for everybody on the crew. And then you just want to make sure that everybody's kind of always communicating. But to me, the extra focus that we put on communication on set helped everybody on the crew.
You could feel that, you felt that came through in the film. Was that this was a family, like a true family, everybody involved. It really felt that way. I'm thinking about those challenges because I'm realizing that we're doing this IG Live, and
so excited you're doing Troy's next movie, right?
Yeah. Wonderful. We're so excited. But I was also thinking about the limitations of what we're doing right now, which is that we don't have an interpreter, right? And so I wanted to say thank you for pushing us to, you know, now you are a model of a film that did this and is successful. And absolutely, for Flash Before the Bang, we're going to be calling on you and, you know, your producers to learn lessons, but also just that constant reminder that then we've got to take it to the next level, like thinking about how do we do an IG Live and making that accessible to everyone.
That honestly, once you start to notice these things, I feel like my brain is always looking now. I'm like, why isn't this captioned? Why isn't this trailer captioned? Why isn't this thing like, once you start to see it, it becomes really the ableism in the world and the autism in the world becomes very, very clear, you know, once you're sort of going like, oh, my deaf friends can't watch this, or, oh, you know, once it becomes really personal, it really does feel like a fight, you know, that has been ignored for a long time in all of
Absolutely. And
This one's been pushed to the side.
I was going to say, to take it back full circle to Cambridge, was it also shows you the limitations when you're pretty sure you're getting it right, right? That we did, as you said, with your storytelling, and I didn't know that was it's your mother's art in the subway, and it's incredible. And yet, so we knew that we wanted to push to represent stories that hadn't been told, but then we also get out into the world, and it gets reflected to us, what about folks with disabilities? What about making it more accessible? What about LGBTQ representation? Just things that, and so we have to also, constantly be open to the things that we do still need to learn and still need to push.
Thing is, you have to allow people to learn, right? Absolutely. And so I do think we are right now in a and it's a good thing that's happening, where we're calling out all this stuff, and it really needs to happen. But there is a learning curve, and people do need an education, and you can't, I think just being brave enough to go. And now it's sort of happening to me, where I'm like, I'm not speaking for the deaf community. I am the outsider coming in, but then people are turning to me and going, what do you say? Do you say deaf? Do you say hard of hearing? Do you say, and I'm like, you can say deaf, you can say hard of hearing. Do not say impaired, hearing impaired. But like, these are things that, like, reporters say this in press. They're like, people really, and in a way, like, I think we have to have kindness as we start to also take people on the journey, because you can't get everything right? Like, you can't. So you are where you're at, and you've got to surround yourself with people that allow you to do the best job that you can. And for me, that meant, I'm a hearing person. I'm coming in to tell this story. I am always going to have a hearing perspective. So how do I surround myself with people who this is their story, and they've lived, and they know it, in their bodies, and they and I did that at the script stage. That's been every step of the way. So it was not just my actors, and the two key people, which I would say any project that involves ASL or deaf talent, an ASL master is huge, because that person is almost, not just a dramaturg for the script who's looking at, I had two. I had Alexandria Wales and Ann Tomasetti, and Alexandria did the translation of the script with me, which is not really a translation. It's much more of an artistic interpretation of because ASL is a purely visual language with its own syntax and structure and humor and all of that. But then Ann was on set with me every step of the way. And so there were a lot of deaf eyes on set that were like putting, there were times when my hearing perspective really did rear itself up, and need to have true collaborators and teammates who are there, who can own the story in a way, even when you have your own limitations because of your own perspective that you're coming from. So, but I do think I don't want people to be so afraid that representation wrong that they're not trying, that they're fallback. Well, I won't that character because there's a way to write that character and involve the people that will help you get it right.
Yeah, I mean, the way I always think about that, when you're writing from the perspective of someone or an identity that you don't know of, that the kindness can come from the person with the most power, right? Because a lot of times the marginalized person has to be kind all the time to kind of get through the day. So even when they, if they respond with anger or frustration, it's based on a lifetime of microaggressions, etc. Having said that, none of us can move forward in ways that we really, we're going to have to move forward together. So we are going to have to be open to teaching and learning together and knowing what we don't know. I mean, there's not any marginalized person that knows everything either. So
and that's the other thing, and that is the problem that we're in now. It's so funny. I hung this little rainbow maker thing, and it's making rainbows all over me. I keep catching
funny.
That's the other thing that's a little, it is, which is why it was important for me to have a lot of deaf voices in the mix. Also, this idea that you hire a consultant who's there to like put the stamp on your project and say, you know, yes, you got it right. It's like nobody's you know, the deaf experience is not a monolith. There's a million experiences. And so no one person can speak for a community and go, yep, you guys did it, you got it right. So I think it's like knowing what you don't know, and then just sort of making sure that you're not looking to one voice then.
Yeah, I love.
I mean, I don't know. We're all, you know, but I do think the way that we made this, and look, there were things we got wrong, you know, because you do, but the way that we made this, our process for making this was really special.
And to your point, Sean, and I mean, this is something that, and I know we'll have to go soon, but I always try to say to everyone is you have to take the risk, right? It's you have to just step out and do it, and then you've just got to be open to hearing the critique for the ways you know that you hurt people or harmed people or perpetuated stereotypes, and then you do better on the next one. But you've got to get it out there. Again, I mean, without you, the industry wouldn't have an example of how to get this right. Now we have this new, very successful example of how do you do this on a set, and we needed that. So it's this balance of, oh, the rainbow is there again, it's gorgeous. It's that
lips, it's attacking me. But I do think, and like honestly, my feeling was I was in a position to get this film made.
Yeah.
And hope is that this movie opens the door for deaf creators, deaf directors, talent, because you know, the more stories that come from this community, those stories need to be told by people from that community who've had zero opportunity to be in a position of power to get a movie made. And so I was so delighted, this is back on you guys, like to see Flash Before the Bang, and like that's a deaf writer and that's a deaf director, and like you guys are taking the next step from CODA, which is like, great, we made CODA. Now let's like kick open the door.
And you did. You
watch, you know, watch deaf characters on screen and ASL on screen. Like, here we go. Here's some other amazing stories from that community.
Awesome. I know we said this was 15 minutes, so, and I know you've got lots else going on. Do you want to leave folks with any words of advice, or kind of what we should do in the future to keep moving on and to tell our stories? And there was so much more we wanted to do, but
I feel like I could talk to you forever. I mean, I don't know what advice I have. And I guess, you know, this process of stepping in, the way that we made this film, and it was sort of every step of the way. It was like we all went fishing, you know, like we all went 3 miles out to sea in boats and like went fishing, and actually like it was insane making this movie. But it was all like we were there kind of like, I don't know, how do we do this? All of us. And the beautiful thing is like, by the end of the shoot, you know, my camera operators were signing, like it just sort of crossed, because I think the deaf community and hearing community have been really separated. And one of the things I love about this story was like a CODA is the bridge, you know, a CODA is the person who lives in both of those worlds. And in a way, by telling the story, we got to like actually have the experience of bridging the communities and having hearing artists and deaf artists like work together to make something. And it was so cool. And it just like, I don't know, you know, I want to like keep recreating that in whatever form in my work. And so I don't know, I would just, my advice to people is like, be in the process, you know, not in the result. Like,
ooh,
yeah.
That's perfect. We are so proud of you, our Cambridge homegirl, and you know, and truly, even without the Cambridge connection, just you stepping out and making this film is so important to so many people, and truly, you helped us get ours going. So, Pearl Street thanks you. I know everybody here is so grateful for you and your work, and we'll be in touch. We will absolutely be in touch.
So excited to. I mean, we were talking about how crazy it is that we don't know each other already. Now we do.
It's done. You're stuck with me.
All right. Thank you, Santa.
You're Sean. Bye-bye.
Bye.